I look really crazy right now. Hi.
Hi.
Can you?
Sorry, am I still in
It's
charge?
okay. Yeah, I actually, yeah. But, um, is it okay if I finish this just so I can? Sorry. I can't pause it right now because I'm recording audio. Um, but hello.
You need me to step out, or you just...
You could sit down your stuff, but it would be helpful if you stepped out, so I would be less distracted. I'm sorry.
No, it's all good. It's all good. Let me get you.
Yeah. I just gotta film this and then I'll be done and I'm gonna wash all this off. Baby Reindeer is a riveting miniseries right now on Netflix starring Scottish comedian Richard Gadd. It's actually a retelling of his very real experiences with a stalker in his 20s. But it's not your typical stalking narrative, and the deeper we get into the show, the more layers of complexity are revealed about Donnie Dunn, which is Richard Gadd's character. The show covers a lot of different topics like sexual violence, grooming, hypersexuality, and trans attraction, and I thought that it would be a really interesting show to discuss on this channel. Hi, my name is katblaque, and this is Movies in My Closet. So Donnie Dunn is a Scottish comedian who moves to London with the dream of becoming a success. Like a lot of people who come to London, he envisioned that the moment he would get here, everything would turn around for him. But like a lot of people who move to the big city, they learn pretty quickly that things don't turn out that way. So he ends up working at a bar where he once used to perform comedy at. And while working at that bar, he meets a woman named Martha. She comes in one day and she can't afford to buy anything, and so he decides to pay for her to get a cup of tea. And this begins a connection that ends in stalking, and she becomes obsessed with him, and that is essentially what the entire show is about. But it's not really about that. It's about a lot more. So, like a lot of the videos that I make about movies and television, we will be going through the entire narrative and there will be spoilers. So, if you are somebody who has not seen Baby Reindeer, I would highly suggest that you go back and watch it, and I will give you guys my episode by episode thoughts, because this is truly a show where you get the complex nuances unfolding throughout the show, and I do feel like it is a good idea for me to speak about all these things in the full narrative as they are revealed, because there's a different interesting conversation, I think, after every single episode. So episode 1 is when Donnie meets Martha. And like I said, the way they connected is that he works at a bar, he decides to buy a cup of tea for her, and this begins their connection. And it's very clear when Donnie meets Martha that she is interesting to him because he feels sorry for her. It's very clear that Martha is giving him a type of attention that he really is missing. Otherwise, he's struggling as a comedian. His intimate relationships are complex, as we will discover. And Martha is here laughing at all of his jokes and really being the sort of energy that he was looking for. So a common theme throughout this entire show is going to be whether or not Donnie enjoys some aspect of his relationship with Martha. And it's pretty clear that he gets something from it to some degree. Donnie came to London, fell right on his ass, and here is Martha, who is essentially his cheerleader. She laughs at all of his jokes, she compliments him, she reinforces his masculinity in a certain way, and he is in the space in life where he's sort of desperate for that, and we will find out why that is as the show goes on. It gets to a point where Donnie actually starts to sort of flirt back, and of course Martha takes it very genuinely and decides to pursue him. And it's pretty clear that Donnie doesn't quite like that, but wants to remain somewhat connected to her. So he continues to sort of, in a way, lead her on a little bit, I'll say. And this is a debate that was happening on TikTok. There's a whole conversation about whether or not Donnie was leading her on, which I guess we'll get to throughout this show as it develops. But it is very clear from the first episode that he sort of gets something from her. In fact, she shows up to one of his comedy performances and he actually plays off of her. And in a way, she is the reason why his comedy show went well. So it's really interesting to sort of see this initial sort of codependence that they sort of have with each other in this way. They actually go on a kind of sort of date, and on the date, she asks him if he's serious about her. And he says, "Yes, I'm serious about you as a friend." But after that date, he is so curious about Martha that he actually follows her home. And this gives her the impression that he is attracted to her. And, the thing that I appreciate about this show is that it sort of shows those sort of gray area, complex moments in dynamics like this, because so frequently in these narratives about stalking, we do really present one sort of way of looking at it. It's always this situation where this person is very clearly bad and this person is very clearly good. And I'll be very clear here, Martha is a terrible person, but what makes it complicated is that Donnie is in some way responding to her affections and responding to her attention, and that of course is going to give her a certain interpretation. Now, one of the reasons I wanted to make this video is because I've been living with more than one stalker, but one stalker in particular who has kind of made my life a living hell for quite some time. He's going to love the fact that I'm talking about him in this video. And one of the things I talked about on TikTok is that stalkers don't really respond to you telling them to leave them alone. So even if Donnie weren't responding to these things and was just flat out like, "Please leave me alone," there's a very high likelihood that that would not push her away from pursuing him. I told my stalker once that I didn't want to hear from him ever again, and he flipped out on me and to this day is still obsessively writing about me on his blog. Now, when I first started watching this, I didn't know that it was based on a true story, and there are so many layers to this that feel really realistic to me. And when it came to the stalking aspect of it, the thing that stood out to me as very realistic is that my stalker, he likes to tell me that no one believes in me as much as he does, that he's the only person who sees my greatness. A lot of his messages to me are basically, "No one appreciates me as much as you do," sort of thing. And I kind of felt like it was so familiar watching this to sort of see Martha do the same exact thing, because that's exactly what my stalker does. And he absolutely refuses to accept no for an answer. So episode 2 is when we really start to see the complexities of Donnie, and we realize that he's got a few secrets. One of those secrets being his relationship with a transgender woman named Terry. Now, Terry is a really interesting character, and I identified with her a lot as a transgender woman. And Terry sort of represents to Donnie this person who came to London and became successful. She's a therapist. I forget where she's from, but she's not from London. She came here and she found success, and she is vibrant and confident, and she has a lot of features that Donnie doesn't have, and that's why he says he is attracted to her. But the strange dichotomy of that is that he's also terrified of anybody knowing about their relationship. In fact, he's not even being honest to Terry about who he is. He says that his name is Johnny and that he's a construction worker, and he constantly catches himself in the lie when she asks about construction work stuff and he doesn't quite have an answer. For the longest time, Donnie and Terry have only been meeting in this really dark bar outside of where he lives, which was way too realistic for me. And they decide to switch things up. It's very clear that even though Donnie is conflicted, he really likes Terry. And so he decides to go outside of his comfort zone, and they go to, as Terry puts it, the gayest bar in London. Donnie is so nervous about going into this bar that he actually downs a bunch of cocaine, which gives him, I guess, a lot of encouragement. I don't do coke, but I know a lot of people who do. And from what they tell me, it's just a very expensive way to give yourself a little bit more courage. Okay. But anyway, he goes in there and they go on this date, and things go semi okay. And they decide to go back to Terry's place. So they get on the subway and they're on the way back to her apartment. And this scene was really triggering because they're on the subway and Donnie starts to get really nervous about everybody around him. He gets this feeling that everyone is looking at him, everybody's judging him, everybody's, seeing that she's transgender and not okay with it. And so he decides to, when they pull up to a stop, just back out of the subway and leave Terry on the subway. I mean, wow, that shit has definitely happened to me. And this episode was triggering because, the thing about it is a lot of men will tell you that what they love about you as a transgender woman is that you're so bold, you're so, confident, and they wish they could have that from you. And a lot of their desire to be close to you is from what they tell you, this sense of admiration that they have for you. But in all reality, somebody who is too ashamed to, claim you isn't really interested in being confident. And it's clear that he is still going through a lot of things, and he's very conflicted for reasons that we will find out in future episodes. After Donnie leaves the subway, he hangs his head in shame and walks home. And on his way home, he runs into Martha, who apparently has been waiting for him. Now, in the first episode, there is a moment when they're on their little kind of sort of date where she sort of asks him, "Has someone hurt you?" and makes it really clear that she's willing to fight the person who hurt him. And when she sees him on this evening, she sort of pushes him up against a wall and starts talking to him about the person who hurt him, and infers that the person who hurt him must have been a man, right? And we don't really know why she feels this way or why she says this, but it's very clear that she perceives something traumatized within him. And I'm going to be very honest with you guys. This part of the show sort of messed with me a little bit, because something that I sometimes struggle with in connecting with certain people is that sometimes I have discovered some of the people who have been very interested in pursuing me turn out to be predatory. Fun story of mine. I have more recently been open to going on new dates with people. Not really, but kind of half-heartedly. And one of the last guys I agreed to go on a date with, I did a little Googling of his name because I get a little crazy sometimes. And I found out that he was on an episode of To Catch a Predator. And that really messed with me. Why is this person who is convicted for unsavory things so interested in me, right? And so I guess I can speak anecdotally from my own experiences that a lot of times people who are predators can sort of perceive trauma in other people. And for reasons I don't really understand, she was able to perceive it in him, and people who've pursued me sometimes have been able to perceive it in me. Not that I hide it very well, but anyway, that was something that also felt like a little bit too real. And again, on the second episode, I still didn't know that this was based on a real story. And there are just so many things in this show that are like way too realistic to just be something that someone came up with. And that's actually what I really appreciate about this show. So in episode 3, Donnie has the semifinal of the comedy competition that he's in, and Terry decides to show up. She shows up with a bunch of friends, basically trying to I'll show you sort of shit, I guess. And also in attendance is Martha. And Martha has the opposite interaction with him than the last time she went to go see his comedy. Instead of, helping him make a good set, she heckles him. And it ends up ruining his set. And it ends up being really, really, really embarrassing. And this is when Terry starts to recognize that this is a real issue that he's going through, this stalking issue that he brought up before. Because in the past, like a lot of people, she sort of just dismissed it. But here it is. Here she's crazy, right? And so this sort of makes Terry feel a bit sorry for him. And they end up reconnecting and actually end up running away outside of the comedy venue to go to this bar and have a normal date at a normal bar that is not dark, right? Also, Terry's a little bit more open to reconnecting with Donnie now because she noticed that he went on the trans dating site that they met on and changed his information to be his real name and real profession. And it's kind of exhilarating. He's happy to be back with her, and Terry is now a little bit more sympathetic. And they're having a decent date, but then, of course, Martha shows up. And Martha decides to physically attack Terry. And she actually rips out some of her hair that I assume was probably transplant hair. And Martha yells at Terry, "You look like a man," which, of course, for Terry is just devastating for her. Now, I have a lot of things to say about Terry, because Terry in this show represents a sort of phase that a lot of trans girls go through, right? A lot of trans women have to sort of reach a point where they realize that they deserve a lot more from men. Sometimes it's just impressive the fact that like a man wants to go on a date with you or some shit, right? And unfortunately, there are some trans women for whom that little bit of happiness they get from going on a date with a man who identifies as heterosexual, or at least says he does, allows them to not quite understand that the person they're going on a date with isn't that great. And watching this episode, I really had that thought. I had that thought of like, wow, Terry is really not a person who yet understands that she is beautiful, and you don't have to deal with this, because now you're dealing with like tens of thousands of dollars of damage because you decided to give this dude a chance. And what did you really, have to gain from that, right? Like, I totally understand the like, I'm going to show up and be hot and he's going to be really bothered by it sort of thing. But like at the end of the day, he's not a guy that is ready to date you, and therefore should not be a man who you give all of this time and attention to. But, that's a pep talk for another day. But I found that to be a really realistic sort of thing too, because I definitely have put up with some bullshit that I should not have put up with. Before Martha attacks her, Terry points out to Donnie that there's clearly something that he seems to be getting from his relationship with Martha. And it's baffling to her that he would allow something like this to go on for so long. And like I said, something that I kind of appreciate about this show is that it doesn't really show this like black or white portrayal of this. It's very clear that he does to some degree get something out of his relationship with her. Donnie currently lives with his ex-girlfriend's mother because he also used to date her, I guess. I guess they were married, if I remember that correctly. And Martha begins to sit outside of their house every single day. And every day that she sits there, she gets more and more and more dejected, which for whatever reason makes him feel sorry for her again. Are you cold? If it's okay, I'm sorry. I'm trying. I still have a little bit to go, and if you want, yeah, I would like to. I can't pause this.
Yeah, sorry.
It's okay.
I'll wait till you're done.
Yeah. That or like reorder something that we've ordered before, because I can't look at a menu right now. Sorry. Something that his ex points out that I found really interesting, that also sort of gave a bit of insight into his character, is that Donnie likes drama. That's what she says about him. She says that he has always been somebody who sort of feeds off of drama. And that's kind of an interesting thing too, because something that isn't really necessarily explored as much in the show is that Donnie does tend to have like an abrasive sense of humor sometimes that very clearly kind of comes from a little bit more of like a edgelordian, I want to see how you respond kind of place that obviously, as we discover, comes from a lot of trauma. So episode 4 is a heavy one. Episode 4 is the heaviest episode. So I will give you guys a warning for that before we get into it. But here we go. So Donnie first came to London for the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And during that festival, he met an older man who worked in comedy as a writer. And he begins having this friendship with this man who decides to give him a lot of insight into his comedy. And it starts to rub off, and it starts to make a really positive change. He goes from not having very many people coming in to listen to his comedy to filling out the entire bar. In fact, he's doing it in the bar that he currently works at. And they develop a relationship where he comes over to this writer's place, this writer whose name is Darian. He comes over to Darian's place and they, talk about comedy. And then eventually they start to do some drugs, right? And they start to do a bunch of drugs. And while he is inebriated, Darian takes advantage of Donnie, right? And throughout their relationship, Darian is constantly sort of dangling this thread in front of him saying, just helping you with this, and you got so much promise here, and you're going to be big and this and that, giving him all of this hope, the kind of hope that somebody in his position, newly moved to London in order to get success and, make connections, would really, really thrive from, right? And so he's in this situation where he continues to return to Darian to get advice and to get perspective. And it seems like occasionally the trade-off is that he takes advantage of him. Now, up to this point, Donnie has never had any sexual interactions with a man, and naturally that impacted the intimacy that he had with his girlfriend at the time. And his response to this assault was to become hypersexual, and he starts to go out and have very high risk sexual experiences with men, with women, with people of all genders, in order to sort of figure himself out. He was, of course, asking himself if his sexuality had shifted or changed, if there was something that he actually enjoyed from what was happening to him, because of course he kept going back, right? And to me, this was a really interesting portrayal of grooming, because as somebody who went through that, I had a very similar experience where I was interested in being an artist. I met this artist who lived in Los Angeles, who had a lot of connections, who knew a lot of people, who was very interested in giving me the impression that, we were going to be able to work together, this and that, when really he was just assaulting me, right? And Donnie didn't start going over to his place for that reason. He wasn't interested in that or looking for that. It was something that was held over him. And when you're in a situation like that, especially when you need things, it's very easy for you to look at a violation like that as like not a huge deal, right? Like in comparison to all the other stuff, not a huge deal. And I know for me, it took me a very long time to understand that what happened to me was not my fault and that it was wrong and things like that. Like, I also went through a hypersexuality phase, and I don't know if I've really seen a lot of portrayals of that in media. So for me, this was like a little bit too real. This is when I really started to Google to see like who wrote this, because it was too realistic. It was way too realistic. And part of his hypersexuality is he starts going on these dates with people, and that's how he met Terry. And the thing about it is, for me, this topic is always a complex one, because I have unfortunately met a lot of men who are attracted to transgender women who went through some sort of sexual violence at the hands of a man, right? And when I wanted to sort of talk about this, I really struggled with figuring out the right way to talk about this, because I'm not going to say most, men feel this way or have these experiences. I'm not going to say that like it was, super, super common, or that it's been super common amongst the men that I've dated or tried to date. But I have actually had more than a few conversations with men who share with me that one of the reasons they started to question their own sexualities is because they had an experience like that with someone, usually in their youth, right? And it's a tough topic, right? We don't talk about trans attraction at all. And I think sometimes when we talk about representation of it, we have this tendency to desire a sort of sanitized portrayal of it, right? Where, of course, the people who are attracted to us are just normal people who don't have trauma and have never been through things. And the stereotype, of course, is that everybody who is attracted to transgender women is mentally, this and that, right? And that's also not true. But it is accurate that there are some men who come to their attraction to transgender women after having processed an assault. And I found that to be really like honest in an uncomfortable way, in a way that genuinely made me like, whoa. Because again, it's one of those conversations that is based on something real. Obviously, he's talking about his own experience. So, it's based on something real, but nobody talks about that. And I get the impression when I talk to a lot of men who have had these experiences that I am the only person that they've ever told, right? So it's clear to me that there are a lot of men out there who just don't ever talk about these things. Don't ever talk about having this experience. And I found it really refreshing, though it was really uncomfortable, that this show went there and had that conversation. I really think that for some men, this show is going to be groundbreaking for them. So, episode 5, Terry and Donnie start getting a lot closer. Terry is recovering from her attack, and so they're having essentially a relationship within the four walls of their apartment. Far too familiar to me. And their relationship starts to thrive. They start to really like each other and connect with each other, and they start to have routines that are based on each other. And even though it's happening within the four walls of their apartment, it's very clear that Donnie really likes this and that he really does love her. But Terry is feeling really insecure. This woman just called her a man. Her appearance is now different and she feels a certain way. And also, he's not having sex with her. And that is a really big issue for her because she now has this anxiety around whether or not he is not interested in having sex with her because he sees her as a man. And I found that to be also way too realistic because I know for a fact that I have internalized men's intimacy issues as me just not being feminine enough, right? There were so many times in my life where instead of saying, oh, this is just the way his body works, or maybe he's just not in the mood, where I felt like I just wasn't feminine enough for him to get turned on. Now, of course, this is a ridiculous thing for me to think now, and it was a ridiculous thing for me to think back then too. But especially when you're not yet in that point of life where you recognize just how like awesome you are, you can really fuck yourself up by thinking about this like this. And in this episode, I also started sort of looking at Terry as this sort of manic pixie dream girl archetype, right? Because here she is, this vibrant girl who comes into a man's life, a man who is lost and seeking meaning and trying to figure out things about himself. And she's the person who makes him question it all, right? And it just kind of started to feel a little like that. Even though I know that's not really what it was, it sort of felt like that to me a lot, because again, when Donnie speaks about his attraction to her, he's predominantly speaking about how inspiring and uplifting she is. And yeah, he probably is physically attracted to her, but I've been in the relationship where here's this man talking about how amazing I am and how just like inspiring I am. But then when we try to have sex or try to do something intimately, it's like, there's hesitation, there's discomfort, there's questions, there's, challenging and things like that. And it really can terrorize you. It truly can, because a lot of times these men are still processing their shit and they will make you feel like it's your fault, right? Men like this often will make it feel like it's your fault. And it's kind of maddening because it's like they're not even in a relationship with you. They're in a relationship with like this idea of who you are. Do you know what I mean? And the thing that really made me uncomfortable in this episode is that the only way that he manages to get it up for her is by imagining Martha sexually. And the thing about this is that also felt really, unfortunately, realistic and upsetting, because I've definitely been in situations where it's clear that a man is using my body as a proxy for someone else's, right? And so I kind of low-key have a lot of intimacy issues around that. Something that I have sort of started to accept in myself is that is a part of the trauma that I have. Being in far too many situations where someone is using me as a proxy has often meant that I'm not actually having sex with someone who is having sex with me, right? They're physically having sex with me, but they're not really connecting with me, right? And unfortunately, that has imprinted on me quite a bit. And left a lot of trauma. And I know that if Terry knew that he felt that way, probably wouldn't be there doing it, right? And I know that because I've had those experiences, it's been a pretty big deal for me to make sure that the people who are interested in having intimacy with me are genuinely there for me and not for something else, not for, their weird black girl thing, not for their weird like trans girl thing, because they're actually attracted to me and interested in me as a person, right? That's like so important to me, so much more important to me than I think it would be had I not had those experiences. And, my sex life is much better for it. Anyway, in episode 6, Terry finally realizes that she is a boss ass bitch and she does not need to settle for men like Donnie, right? Terry finally wakes the fuck up and realizes that she does not need to be in a relationship with Donnie, and she decides to break up with him. And Donnie is very clearly really hurt by this. He obviously was falling in love with her, but it's clear that he has a lot of shit to work through. He's got a lot of stuff to work through. And Terry just reached her limit and no longer really wants to entertain it. Episode 6 is also the final for the comedy competition that he's in. And, throughout his comedy career, he's always been sort of a prop comedian. He's a gag comedian. He's got like, this suitcase of wacky jokes that he tells. And it's always sort of operated as a sort of barrier between himself and the audience. And in this episode, he's really immensely impacted by his breakup with Terry and by all the other things happening in his life. And he starts to do his act as he usually would. And then he breaks down and he decides to get real with the audience. And he decides to basically tell the entire story about the stalking, about the grooming experience that he had, about the transgender girlfriend, everything. He just like sits down and gets real. And people respond pretty well to it, and they post it on the internet and it goes viral. And this was another one that made me feel a certain way, because something that I've always really resented is being part of someone's story, right? I've dated a lot of men, and I'm using dating as a very loose term here, who go on and learn something from our relationship and they take it into their next, right? And they will often, contact me way down the line just to tell me, how much better they are now. And I'm always happy to hear that people have changed and grown from, being the shitty person they used to be. But I just wish that I didn't have to go through that for them to get there. Do you know what I mean? I wish that while they were on their path to finding themselves and figuring out who they were, that they didn't disrupt who I was, right? That they didn't constantly derail what I was doing, that they didn't waste my time, lie to me, mislead me, hurt me because they were too insecure to be honest with me, right? It sucks. It sucks. Some of the men who have hurt me the most significantly in my life are men who are now amazing boyfriends, amazing husbands, right? I will never forget, there was a trans girl on YouTube actually, and I saw one day that she made a video with an ex of mine that was abusive. Longtime followers of my YouTube channel will remember when I shaved my head in college, right? It's because of that guy. And here he is on YouTube with this trans girl, treating her with so much respect and celebration that he never gave me, right? And it's hard. It's hard to be part of somebody else's growth journey. And as happy as I am for people, it's just so painful to feel like you had to be part of that in order for someone to realize something about themselves, right? And so I felt really sorry for Terry, right? Because here he is, he's not quite in a better position, right? But he's clearly someone who gained inspiration from their relationship. And what did Terry experience in their relationship? He left her on the subway. She got attacked physically because of some woman that he didn't report to the police, who, is chasing after him for, what we understand is things that he probably said to her, right? Not to blame him, but he wasn't always very clear about how he felt, right? And she could have just never had gone through any of that, right? She could have just literally never had those experiences. But because she dated him, here she is, right? And so it's great that he learned. It's great that he grew. It's great that he's changed and shifted and, all that's awesome. But it just sucks that Terry had to go through all of that for him to get there. It's upsetting to me that men like Donnie have to go through a series of disrespecting somebody in order to learn how to respect them. So in the final episode of the show, Donnie is finally at a point of success, the point of success that he's always wanted to be. His video went viral, everybody's talking about it, and he is finally the hot comedian that he has always wanted to be. But he's unhappy. He finally got there and realized that it wasn't what he wanted. And I've had that experience too. That was kind of my experience in the animation industry. I was like, okay, I went to CalArts, I got my degree, and I'm here and I hate it. Right? So I also really identified with that. Martha is still obsessively messaging him, so he goes to the police to see if they can do anything about it. And they tell him that they unfortunately can't. And he essentially gets told to monitor all of the messages and emails until she says something threatening, right? Until she says something that will actually be actionable. And so he starts to really obsessively listen to all of her messages, and he starts to collect them and categorize them, and he starts to, lay them all out and everything. And he tries to find the little nugget of threatening language in her messages. Now, because he recently went viral telling his entire story, he starts to become a little anxious about it getting back to his parents. And of course, he knows that that's information that Martha, who has his parents' phone number, would likely communicate to them. And so he decides to go on a train and go see his parents and have a full conversation with them about everything that happens before Martha gets to them. And this scene really, really touched me because something that happens is he tells them about not just his experience with grooming, but how he felt about it as a man. And a big thing that he was struggling with is he did not want for his father to see him as less of a man, knowing that a man assaulted him. And at that moment, his father says, "Would you look at me as less of a man if I told you that it happened to me?" This was another moment for me that was like, whoa, we literally never talk about this, because the father was essentially saying that he also was sexually assaulted by a man. And he specifically mentioned that it happened to him within the Catholic Church, right? And so we're also not having a lot of conversations about that. And it really just, there are just so many conversations happening within this that just made me really think like, wow, this show is talking about this stuff. And even though I know there are plenty of other shows that kind of do talk about it, there aren't a lot of shows that talk about it like this. It was so honest and so raw. So anyway, eventually Martha threatens his parents, and that is ultimately what ends up getting the police to do something. And so she ends up going to jail. And after she goes to jail, it's clear that Donnie kind of misses her. And he actually starts to get a lot of comfort from listening to her messages even after she's in jail. He also tries to reconnect with Terry, but Terry is already in a new relationship. I'm happy for her. One of the last scenes in the show is of him going to confront his groomer. And when I say confront, I really mean he wanted to go see if he was probably bothered by the video, right? And it's pretty clear that Darian seems pretty unbothered by it. In fact, he even offers him a job, which Donnie kind of sort of agrees to take, right? And it ends on that note. And I don't know if that's going to be setting a foundation for a second season. I personally don't think that this show needs a second season. If it ended here, it would be great. But it ends on this kind of ambiguous note that sort of, suggests that maybe he's not done processing all of this, which of course he's not, right? And I kind of appreciated that they had that scene in there, because I, even after my groomer did what he did to me, continued to go back to him, because what a lot of people don't understand about grooming is that it is a relationship, right? And it's a relationship where, like I said, the positives tend to outweigh the negatives, right? Like the negatives are huge and devastating and terrible, but you feel as a person that's in it that this person, though they may have hurt you, is more good than bad. That's kind of how the grooming aspect of it takes root, right? And so for him, I know that he knows he's been dramatically harmed by him. He knows that it's really impacted him, but there's still a part of him that doesn't see Darian as completely bad, even if he may say, fuck this dude, he's a groomer, right? To calm himself down from the confrontation, he actually listens to one of Martha's messages. And it's in that message that we learn where baby reindeer comes from. It is a nickname that she gave a little baby reindeer stuffed animal. And it's very clear in that voice memo that she has childhood trauma, right? She is a deeply traumatized person, which is why she latches on to people like Donnie, right? And he goes into a bar, sits down, realizes that he doesn't have his wallet, and the bartender offers to pay for his drink, right? And I thought that was also a really, really nice ending to the show. So Baby Reindeer, like I said, really covered a lot of topics. And I really do think that in some ways it's a pretty revolutionary show. It sort of talks about dysfunctional male sexuality, I'll call it, in a way that a lot of other shows don't, right? He's dealing with these feelings about masculinity, his sexuality, and these things that, we kind of talk about a little bit, but not in this raw way. And like I said, Donnie reflects a lot of the experiences of some of the men that I've dated, some of the men that I've had experiences with. And so I know that there's going to be people who watch this show and realize like, oh shit, I've had this experience. I'm not alone. And for that, I think it's pretty amazing. I was thinking about how I don't think I've ever, and you guys are going to have to tell me if there's another example of this. I don't think I've ever seen a show written and starring a man who speaks about his attraction to transgender women openly. Richard Gadd, from what I understand, is openly bisexual, so he does that pretty regularly, I suppose. I've never seen any of his comedy. I don't know much about him. I just know him from this show. But from what I got from this show, it is so cool that he is starting those conversations. And for me, it is pretty revolutionary. So those are my thoughts about Baby Reindeer. I am so curious what you guys have to say. So give me your thoughts and reflections in the comment section below. Did you have the same reaction that I had, where you were like, oh my God, this is so real? Because I just kept finding myself being really shocked by the accuracy. I was like, whoa, like, I can't believe they're talking about that in this way, but purely because we don't often have conversations like that. So it was, in a way, kind of shocking to me, but I really, really appreciated that they went there. I really, really appreciated that they went there. So anyway, give me your thoughts in the comment box below. Also, before I go, I want to make something kind of clear. This is a channel that for me will just be where I upload all of my thoughts about movies and TV shows. If I have something that I think makes a larger point, I may use my main channel to discuss it, but for the most part, this is just going to be my reflections about the themes and subjects of these shows that talk about things that are often closeted, experiences that are often not understood, queer experiences, alternative lifestyles. That's sort of what we're talking about over here. And so I'm really excited to keep making content over here, but I also want to make it clear that I'm currently working on movies in my closet as a more highly evolved, more developed thing. And I'm currently sort of putting together the resources for that. So if you guys enjoy what I do on here and on my other channels, please consider supporting me over on Patreon. My Patreon members get access to exclusive content where I talk about all of the things that we're doing behind the scenes. And yeah, I'm really excited to give you guys some of the stuff that I've been really working on, because like, girl, we've got some plans. We got some really ambitious projects that I'm trying to work on in the next couple of years. I could use all of the support. So on that note, I will talk to you guys next time. This has been Movies in My Closet, and I'm katblaque, and I'll see you next time. Bye.